everybody, Captain Lance Valentine here. Welcome back to Teaching Fishing. Today, we're going to take a little bit of time, slow down a little bit, and take an advanced look at trolling speed. You know, most of us think of trolling speed as just our speed over ground as we're going across the water on our GPS. And although that is a small piece of the puzzle, it's important to understand how important, number one, how important trolling speed is, and number two, ways that we have to look at it different than we do now is just our speed over the ground. So that's what we're going to talk about tonight. We're going to take a few minutes here and kind of break down and take an advanced look at trolling speed. Now, we think trolling speed is pretty important. If you go back to our 8 steps, you realize we have these 8 steps listed in order of importance there. Be in the right location, be in the depth of water, know how deep the fish are, get your lures above them. We call this the where. Where are we going to fish? What part of the water column, how deep water, where do our lures need to go? Then we go below the line and start talking about presentation, or the what. And the first step to get right in presentation, if you want to catch fish, is to get your lure speed right. Getting your lure speed right is more important than your lure size, lure shape, lure action, and definitely more important than lure color. So we think lure speed is pretty important. So that's why we want to take a little bit of time tonight, kind of take a little more advanced look at lure speed, not just speed over ground on your GPS. So why is trolling speed important, and what do we need to do with it to kind of really be effective every time we're on the water? Well, a couple things. Number one, obviously trolling speed affects your lure action. What does your lure look like underneath the water? What does it look like to the fish? How is it moving through the water? Your trolling speed may affect your lure depth. We're going to talk about that in detail. It's really not affected by your trolling speed, but by other factors that are affecting your trolling speed. We'll go into that in just a second. And the trolling speed, obviously you want to be able to measure it, duplicate it, and again, we need to know what the real story is if we want to catch more fish every day, okay? So let's go ahead and talk about some factors that can actually affect your trolling speed. And they are pretty obvious to most people. Obviously, wind, waves, surface currents, but most importantly, and probably most overlooked, and the focus of what we're going to really talk about tonight, is subsurface currents. What's going on below the surface of the water that you can't see that's affecting lure speed, which is making your lures run at depths you don't think they're running at and working at actions that you don't think they're running at. Very, very important. Okay, let's talk number one about how trolling speed can affect your lure action. It's actually, I think, pretty simple. I think most anglers understand it, but let's just take a few minutes to talk about it. So in our example, we're out in the water in our polar craft, we're trolling lures across the lake. We've got a speed over ground of 2.0 on our GPS. That's never going to change. I'm going to show you 3 slides here. This is number 1 of a series of 3. And the speed over ground on our GPS is never going to change. It's going to stay at 2.0. Again, that's what we look at. So let's go out in a perfect world. There's no wind, there's no waves, there's no current, there's definitely no subsurface current. So our lure is going through the water at 2 miles an hour, and it has a 2-mile-an-hour action. Whatever that action is, at 2 miles an hour, it has it, okay? So if we're catching fish in this conditions, doesn't matter what direction we go, just get 2.0 on the GPS, boom, we're golden. But this doesn't happen very often. Let me show you how just a little bit of subsurface current can really change the way your lures are running depending on which way you're moving. So let's go on the water. We're still 2.0 miles per hour speed over ground on our GPS, what we look at, but let's say we're going with a half-mile-an-hour current. So now that lure is being pulled 2 mile an hour forward, but that current is pushing it a half mile ahead. Now that bait only has an action of 1.5 miles. It has less intense action than it does at 2. That makes sense? So now because we're going with the current, our lure is actually running less aggressive, okay? Let's turn around. Again, remember, our speed over ground is exactly the same. We're just going with a 0.5 mile an hour current, which means our lure is only going 1.5 miles an hour through the water. Let's turn around and come back and troll the other way. And now, speed over ground is still 2 miles an hour. Our subsurface current now is still that half-mile an hour, but now we're going into it, and now that lure is cranking. It's going at 2.5 miles an hour. So just with a half-mile-an-hour current, a very, very small current, our bait can go this action one way and this action the other way. Now you maybe understand why you catch fish going one direction and not the other. It's not the way the fish are facing, it's not the way the wind's blowing, it has nothing to do with that. It has to do that your lure is running 1 mile an hour different going with the current as opposed to against the current. A current that you're not even paying attention to, not even looking at, because your speed over ground is still exactly the same. Okay? So speed is a lot more than just speed over ground. That's an important part of this. Remember we talked about trolling speed can affect your lure depth. Now, trolling speed itself, when we're trolling unweighted crankbaits, does not affect the lure's depth. Basically, by going under the water, our friends at Precision Trolling, Mark Romanek, said that once a lure gets its designed action, all the way up to the speed where it loses that designed action and it runs erratic, anywhere in that speed range, which for most walleye baits is about 1 to 3.2 miles an hour, that speed doesn't affect lure depth with unweighted crankbaits. Okay? So this is kind of a misnomer. Speed doesn't really affect how deep our lures run, but that current underneath the water that we're not even paying attention to can be a big part of this. And we can measure that by measuring the speed of our lure at the lure depth. We'll talk about that in just a second. So here's what happens. Most people think wrongly that when you put an offshore planer board out, your lure basically goes from the board to where it is, and so it's a straight line. The fishing line is in a straight line from your lure to your board. That's not what happens. Most of that line is actually on the surface. That's why it takes, 100 feet of line to get a lure down 15, 18 feet. It's not a straight line. A lot of that line is up on the surface, and then it goes out to a certain point and it starts to get a bow in the line, and then it starts to pull your lure down. That bow is important because if we're trolling and we're trolling with no current, that lure is going to get to the depth it needs to get to, okay? If we're trolling with a slight current, that lure is probably still going to get really, really close to the depth that you picked on the Precision Trolling app. So I'm just going to use 20 feet deep as a 100-foot back, basically, on an 800 series reef farm. We're just going to use that as our example. So no current, no subsurface current, no wind. That lure 100 feet out is going 20 feet deep. I've got a little bit of current pushing me. That lure, even though the action is a little less, is still getting down to about 20 feet. But now, let's screw the whole thing up. Let's turn around and go into that half-mile-an-hour current, either surface or subsurface, and now that current hits this bow in the line and actually lifts our baits higher. So again, some days you're catching fish going one way and not the other. It's not the way the fish are heading. It may be your speed, or it may be going into the current. Your lure is actually higher, and the fish like it up there higher than it is when you go down current, even though the amount of line you let out is exactly the same. Understand that subsurface currents, when you go into them, can actually raise your baits up higher. So the subsurface current, only a half-mile an hour, can raise our baits higher and create an action difference from 1.5 to 2.5 miles an hour worth of action with the same 2.0 speed over ground. Does that make sense? So just looking at speed over ground and just measuring how much line we have out isn't the real story, guys. You're not getting the whole picture. You've got to be able to understand what's happening down at your lure. What is your lure doing? How is the current below the surface affecting what's happening on your lure? And that's where we come into this last part of the puzzle, how trolling speed affects everything. We have to be able to measure our true trolling speed. We have to be able to duplicate it. That's key. And we have to be able to know the real story. What really is going on? And our speed over ground on the GPS, even though it tells us how fast our boat is moving across the surface, it really does not give us a true picture of what our lures are actually doing below the surface. Okay? So, how can we measure this? Pretty simple. Obviously, our speed over ground, to measure it, duplicate it, we're going to be able to do it here on our GPS. But again, that's just one piece. And actually, to be honest with you, a piece that I could do without. If you were going to take away any of the speed things I'm going to show you, you could take away my GPS speed and I would be happy. Because that speed is really irrelevant to what's really happening down at the lures. So we need some way to measure what's going on. Now, a couple different ways to do this. My favorite way, there's a couple different products on the market. My favorite way is with a product called a Fish Hawk. Now, there's a product on the market called a Smart Troll, which is little probes about the size of a pen that actually go in line, and they send back data to a transducer that's hard mounted on your boat, and then that data comes back to a phone or a tablet, And you can actually put, I think, up to 8 of these. So each lure can have its own probe, and you actually know how deep each lure is running. One of those probes, let's say you have 6 probes in your system, one for all your 6 rods, you can get the depth of each one because each one is colored a different color, but you can only get speed from one of those. So you may be above or below the current. Fish hawk system has traditionally been a hardwired system. I have to have it hardwired to my dash. I got to get power to the display. I've got to have a transducer on the back of my boat and then a probe that goes down, usually on a downrigger. But a couple years ago, Fish Hawk guys came out with this product. This is an amazing product. It's called the Fish Hawk X2. And it's basically a probe, and it comes with a battery operated probe, and the display is actually battery operated. Very, very small display. It's a battery operated display, so you can take it anywhere. It all fits in a box about the size of a small laptop, and you can take it anywhere you want to go. Now, how do we get the information from this probe? Well, you can see right here, I've got a little fishing rod. They sell a short little fishing rod. So I've got an extra rod holder on my pontoon, and I've got another rod holder in my Polar Craft, and I've got my Fish Hawk display mounted in my TraxTech track. This slide deucer here, this is the transducer. So the probe goes down. I run a 2-pound ball to get that probe down to where I need it. I use an inexpensive line counter with 80-pound braid on it. And then that slide deucer, you can see it right here, slides down your fishing line. It's got a little slot on it. You put the fishing line in it, you close this little top part, and now that transducer slides down and goes about 3 or 4 feet below the surface of the water. It then hardwires into the back of the display, and now I've got a portable system I can take anywhere. So what it gives me is it gives me temperature, and most importantly, it gives me speed down where that probe is. Now, running it the way I do it, I run it in midship with a 2-pound ball. I can almost always see it on my sonar, and I kind of know where it's at. On the pontoon, on the Angler Quest, we have a set of TraxTech downriggers. We run it on a downrigger because it's much more effective. But if you don't have downriggers, or you're on a small boat, or you're just on a regular boat, this X2 with that little rod or the 2-pound ball gets it down. You can almost always see it inside your sonar cone and know how deep it is. So this comes back to me and gives me speed at the depth my lures are fishing. I try to keep it about 1 or 2 feet above. My lures are kind of in the middle of a spread. So let's say I'm fishing lures from 15 to 25 feet down. I may have that probe somewhere in the 22, 23, 24 foot range to kind of give me an idea. Now, here's how important this is. We just got back from our fall fishing education weekend in Lake Erie a couple weeks ago. We caught a bunch of fish. We had great fishing. We needed to be about 1.9 to 2.0 the day we had the best fishing, about 1.9 to 2.0 on the Fish Hawk. Listen to what I'm going to tell you here. We trolled in a straight line. Didn't turn around, just trolled in a straight line for almost 4 miles. In that 4-mile stretch, to keep 1.9 to 2 speed down at the probe, I had the speed over ground on my GPS anywhere from 1.4 to 2.7. That's a 1.3 mile an hour difference in the current, going the same direction. We hit these little pockets of current, and all of a sudden you go, what in the heck? Why are we not catching any fish? You look at the Fish Hawk and it'd be saying 1.4. So you have to crank up the engine, get some more RPMs on the Suzuki. All of a sudden the Fish Hawk would say 2.0, 1.9, 2.0. Boom, we start catching fish again. Then all of a sudden the fish would stop. You're like, what in the heck? And you look back and the Fish Hawk would say 2.6. Like, what just happened? So you'd slow the boat down. And you get the boat down to 1.3, 1.4, 1.5, and all of a sudden you get 1.9 to 2.0 on the Fish Hawk. Bam, we start catching fish again. So that speed over ground on your GPS is what we use. It's really not that important, guys. Understand how speed down at your lures, because of subsurface currents, can affect how deep your lures run and the action that they have. And both of those together are going to determine every day how many fish you catch. Now, everybody says current is only a big water thing, a deep water thing. That's 100% not true. This summer, I was on Saginaw Bay, up on my spot up by Pinconning. I was fishing about 11, 12 feet of water, kind of out of the way, right? The Pinconning bar is kind of tucked away. It's not in the main part of Saginaw Bay. And I was catching fish going one way and couldn't catch them going the other. And we, usually up there we catch 30, 35 fish a day, so fishing's fairly easy in the summertime. I'm like, what in the heck is going on? So I don't always have my Fish Hawk out on Saginaw Bay because I assume there's not a lot of current most days. Well, I stuck the Fish Hawk down, and at my 2.8 miles an hour on my GPS, I was going anywhere from 2.2 to 3.1 on my fish hawk. So there was almost a mile-an-hour current, 7 to 8 feet down in 11 to 12 feet of water. That's ripping. Once I got that figured out, I was able to adjust my speed over ground going the way I wasn't catching fish to match the speed over ground or the speed down with my probe, get that right going both directions, and we caught fish going north, going south, going east, and going west. Because I was able to adjust and keep that probe right. Something nobody would think about in 12 feet of water, 6, 7 feet down, you'd never think about a current. There was a current that was almost a mile an hour that was causing me to not catch fish other than going one direction. How many fish are you missing because you don't understand what actually is going on down at your lure, how that subsurface current is affecting not only the speed of your lure, but the depth of your lure. Okay, so we need to get the real picture. That's what that is. Remember how important lure speed is to us. It's the first thing you need to think about when you think about the presentation. Once you get in the right spot, once you know where the fish are, once you know how deep to put your lures, it's important that you start getting that lure speed right. Okay, so there's a quick look at, a little advanced look at lure speed. Think about that as you're contemplating some of the days you caught fish, some of the days you didn't catch fish, some of the days you could catch them one way and not the other. Well, it really wasn't probably lure color or lure shape. It really wasn't too many other things. You probably had a subsurface current you were dealing with that you didn't know was there, and you never got your lure action, lure speed, and then by default, your lure depth right going all directions. Pay attention to that. It's going to catch you a lot more fish. Okay, thanks for tuning in tonight. As always, you can check out our website at teachingfishing.com. If you need to get a hold of us about a question, teachingfishing@gmail.com. We are on Facebook at Teaching Fishing, and if you want to win an opportunity or enter for an opportunity to win a free day on the water with me, be sure you go to our Teaching Fishing YouTube channel and subscribe. When we get to 1,000 subscribers, we're going to make sure that we pick a winner, and someone's going to have a chance to spend a day on the water with me in 2021. All right, guys, thank you for your time tonight. Really appreciate it. Hope you learned something to maybe think about the days you are catching them one way and not catching them the other. It may not be that super secret paint job. It may just be your lure speed, lure depth, and lure action is not exactly right. All right, guys, have a great night. Thanks for tuning in to Teaching Fishing. I'm Captain Lance Valentine. We'll see you back here next time.